We are starting Chapter 5 on page 51. Natural Law. What is obvious? Chapter 5. Regardless of one's environment or education, everyone knows when something is putrid, an infected wound is gross, and the smell of defecation and rotting flesh turns our stomachs. Nature is telling us to avoid them. Natural law is self-evident. The assumptions found in our founding documents include the idea that natural law reflects the obvious. Truth, for the most part, is what is obviously, instinctively, innately true. Objects fall, birds fly, fish swim, life has value, babies are innocent, mountains are tall, water makes things wet, and slakes our thirst. Violence against living creatures is wrong, cruelty is evil, kindness is good, hurting is bad, healing and health is good, slavery is wrong, freedom is right. Heading, freedom. But what is freedom really? Many people see freedom as unspoken permission to do whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want, however they want. I've actually heard the scenario described as pure freedom. There are two problems with this line of thinking. The first is, if everyone was doing whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want, however they want, to whomever they want, that is not freedom at all, but anarchy and chaos. Think about the concept of the Purge film series. Life is not good in such a scenario. It is about trying to survive the most evil intentions of the evil people with the power to extinguish lives. Might makes right. The side with the most guns wins. The side most willing to use force and violence against others rules over everyone else. This idea of pure freedom is not freedom at all. It is just another pathway to tyranny and oppression, an evil and violent one. The second problem is that it is impossible to do whatever we want, whenever we want. If we are free to do whatever we want, are we free to be a fish? Are we free to be a bird? How can we know what being a fish is like, or being a bird? Do we know the mind of a bird? Do we have its abilities? Can we grow a beak at will? Can we spread our wings and fly off a tall building and land safely in a nearby tree? Are we free to be something we are not? True freedom requires an understanding of natural law, that we are confined to act within the framework of reality. I come back to this argument about reality very shortly, but while mental illness and or imagination may allow us to, in our minds at least, live in a fantasy world of our own choosing, we cannot force someone else to live in our heads with us. But yes, and I don't really address it in this book, there are more and more Americans who want the power to force, so it's not about freedom, want the power to force those who live in reality to instead at least say they live in a million or more different fantasy worlds depending on whom they are interacting with at the moment. It's mind-blowing. But freedom says we are free to act within the framework of reality without coercion. When we are acting freely, that means nothing and no one is forcing us to behave in a certain way. So while someone is free to believe a fantasy or a lie, freedom principles preclude them from forcing others to believe it too. You just cannot force someone to believe something they don't believe. It is also important to understand that even doing what you want to do, if you are forced to do it, is not freedom. The example I frequently use is the fact I love roller coasters. I love the thrill I get from each drop and loop-de-loop and corkscrew and suspension. I like to and have ridden roller coasters all day and enjoyed every single minute of it. But if I'm in line to get on my favorite roller coaster, so I'm obviously planning to ride the roller coaster and planning to enjoy it, and a man comes up to me and puts a gun to my head and threatens to kill me if I don't get on the roller coaster, I am not free to do that which I love to do. If freedom is the absence of coercion, we can never be forced to be free, just like we can never be forced to be happy. And one definition of freedom that I use frequently is that of choice. Freedom is choice, but it is not really a choice unless it is an informed choice. And the greater number of choices one has to choose from, the more information one has about this greater number of choices, the more free a person is. More choices equals more freedom. More information equals more choices equals more freedom. If the government tells you to do something or forces you to do something you already wanted to do, just because you wanted to do it does not mean you are free to do it. And it doesn't even have to be just the government. It can be your employer or it can be your family. Just because you want to do something, if you're forced to do it, it does not mean you are free to do it. The two are diametrically opposed because you are not free to not do it. And not only that, what if you wanted to do it because the information you had was bad or incomplete? And if you had had more information, you would not have wanted to do it. Or what if there were other choices you were not aware of that you would have preferred over what you're being forced to do? If you are not aware of these options, or if they are not options according to the powers that be, you are not free to make the decision to do the thing that you thought you wanted to do. Can anyone out there listening think of a time where you were forced to do something you thought you wanted to do, but then later realized had you had more information, you would have not wanted to do that thing? We are free to do good and right, but we cannot be forced to be or do good. Once we are coerced into being or doing good, it is no longer good. As Thomas Aquinas argues, nothing is virtuous if not voluntary. The freedom to do good must also include the possibility that we will instead choose to do evil. The freedom to do the right thing inherently means there is a possibility we could choose to do the wrong thing. The freedom to embrace truth is the freedom to reject that same truth out of hand. Virtue is not based on majority decision. Virtue is not based on just obedience, carte blanche. Now, we also cannot force anyone to agree with us. The government cannot force us to believe that they are correct. We cannot force someone to see what is true. We cannot be forced to believe a truth by another entity. We cannot make a blind person see, nor can the government, nor can your employer. A blind person is blind, and they will continue to see or interact with the reality in a way that they believe is best. We cannot force our values and our sight on anyone else. Now, a lot of people want to be on the winning side or to have the power to make people who disagree with them to at least say that they now agree with them, or force these people who disagree with them to behave as though they agree with them now. This is what democracy is about, to try to determine what is right and true and good and virtuous based on who is saying it, not based on an immutable standard or the framework of reality. And a framework implies a frame, boundaries of reality. Heading: the freedom paradox. Natural law thus implies limits to our freedoms. The first limit is that of reality. Nature's law is birthed out of nature. It includes the laws of physics and all the truths that we hang all the laws of the universe upon. The framework upon which freedom relies is that of reality regarding the physical universe. So an understanding of the limits within the physical universe is necessary to engage the world physically, right? We have to understand gravity, or at least know that things fall. And the greater a mass, the heavier it is, for example. We have to agree that water is wet and ice is cold to enjoy a glass of cold water on a hot day. We have to understand or know that we cannot walk through solid walls. Things like this we know. We know there are physical limits to our freedom. And this implies that there is a framework, one within which any individual can maximize their personal rights and freedom. Aligning with the idea that anarchy is not freedom at all, the reality paradox is that when there are boundaries, limits to our freedom, we are more free. Similar to the earlier playground example, but probably better, is the example of top golf. With a net in the distance, golfers can stack their tees on top of each other and engage in driving practice in the middle of a city. It would be to no one's advantage to not have the net. It also maximizes their opportunity for driving practice by stacking these tees on top of each other. The net not only prevents the loss of balls, but keeps them from damaging cars or hitting and injuring people, while allowing many more golfers the opportunity to work on their golf game than does an open driving range. The lesson: where there are obvious limits to one's freedom, it can be easier and more enjoyable to live in that freedom. Fewer people fear the actions of their fellow man. We appreciate what we have even more and exploit it for more personal and group gain to a much greater extent. Do you agree with this? Do you think that we are happier and more free because of the limits placed on us based in the framework of reality? If you don't agree with this, or if you don't think this, how do you think removing the limits, and what limits would you remove? How do you think that would ensure greater freedom or greater happiness?